everybody. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate, leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google, Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also all smart TVs 2016 forward. Don't forget to subscribe to Candid Frank Stanisci on 1030 on YouTube. Now on CFL Talk, joining me, Mr. CFL expert, David Morassutti, in the process of making a big purchase. So a new car is in your future, huh?
Yeah, apparently it's not as easy to say, I want that. I want that. Give it to me. More to it than that.
If it comes down to what you want, you know full well you're not going to end up buying that when it comes to reality.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the levels of cars that I look at and want are not exactly, they don't coincide with the cars that I'm actually going to buy. But that is the fun part of deciding to, to buy a car. And my favorite phrase that sellers put out there is, can you see yourself in this car? The hook, baby, the hook.
Oh yeah, hook, line, and sinker.
So how's it going? You getting close to making a final decision?
Yeah, probably by tomorrow I'll be signing some papers and throwing down money on a table. Well, it doesn't exactly work like that apparently, but it would have been nice to have done something like that.
So it's kind of your version of the draft?
In a way, yeah.
Right. You're looking at all the prospects.
Looked at all the prospects, did all the research, looked at all the scores, test scores, like that. Pretty much felt like, yeah, I was a scout at the combine.
Kick, runner, pass.
Yeah, exactly.
Who are you going for? Get the quarterback. If you can afford the quarterback, you get.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's my segue, because tomorrow we're getting an opportunity to talk to the coaches and general managers once again. This time under the prospects for the draft. The combine is the actual subject matter, but as does happen in these availabilities, there's an opportunity to talk to the coaches and general managers about something other and the draft. So yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation, I guess. You can't be there because you're doing this personal thing that you got to do. That this is I guess for you, for me, it would be a once in 6, 7, 8 years minimum decision, right? A decision you're not going to make again for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
It sounds like the CFL draft. We're back there again. So, you got to pick the right candidate, baby, because you're stuck with that candidate for a few years.
Yeah. No, so for sure.
So tell me what your thoughts are on the draft and tomorrow, as far as the conversations that you see that should happen, the questions that should come up. If you have, obviously we work together, so if there's a question I can throw out there, I'll do it. So what do you see about the draft, first of all?
Well, I'm curious to see, we've seen a real change in the way that the CFL teams have gone about with the draft. It used to always be about which offensive lineman was going to go first. Now you're seeing more skilled. And what I mean by I don't mean that playing offensive line is not skilled. You need skill to play on the offensive line. What I mean is,
it is skill. You're right. Don't be so defensive. Yeah. You're right. It's skill as opposed to strength, power.
Right.
Like offensive linemen and defensive linemen, their physical presence is a big factor. Whereas talent, there's just so many ways talented players can beat you.
Exactly. And I think the big one here is, we're seeing when it comes to the CFL, a bit of a change where I think more players from down south are considering the move up to play in the CFL, right? Absolutely. And you're going to see, I think, more of that going forward, just because opportunity, right? You give yourself an opportunity in the CFL, and you see now players, if they do well in the CFL, they go down to they get a chance in the NFL to show what they can do, right? So
Right.
I do think that that's one thing is, how many of the skill positions, wide receiver, defensive end, the positions that generally never got a lot of high grades. I'm curious to see how that will change with you know
Yeah. Here, let me throw
and,
my.
and I'll tell you this. So John Hodge from Three Down Nation, his mock draft has a receiver going first overall out of Auburn, right?
Right.
The top five are from American universities, right?
Absolutely.
The
Not
first
surprising.
Canadian in like, you're gonna get Canadians picked. Don't get me wrong, but some teams will go if they feel like the prospect from down south is a better prospect, they're gonna go for it.
Absolutely. But here, let me add my 2 cents to what you're saying, because I want to try and support what you're saying. And this is the way I'll support it. As the years have gone by, in the last, I'll say just for round figures, in the last 10 years, there's been a change. Not only has there been a change because you started by talking about offensive linemen. There was an automatic, okay, who's the best offensive lineman? He's first overall. And then it became defensive linemen got involved a little bit. And then, of course, now we start having defensive backs. We start having receivers. And here's the other thing. The draft used to be something that you used to draft the guy. You get 3 years with the guy, right? And you would have those 3 years, those first 3 years to figure out if you should keep him. Well, what's happened in the last maybe 5, 6 years, maybe 10, is now when they draft players, they're more impactful off the get-go. We're seeing rookies be very impactful in the CFL, not just in regular season games. We've seen it in the past couple of Grey Cups as well, which tells me this is a very important function in developing a team in the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. And we're seeing and the big thing for me when you're looking at the draft, and people try to always say, you know what, does a draft that my thing has always been, I want to see the draft get more prestige in the CFL. What I mean by that is the CFL treats it more like an event, like every other sports league does with their draft, because it does two things. It shows an importance for the event itself and the future of the league. We're talking about players who are making up the future of this CFL, right? Guys that are going to be here, hopefully for as long as as their careers allow them to. I've always said that that's always a thing the CFL falls short on, is not making an event out of this. Pick a central location, invite some of the top guys to come up, and enjoy a draft experience. Like, to me, there's no draft experience for these young Canadians that want to come up here.
And you're 100% right, just because of what I said before you said what you said, which is when you draft players now, they become very impactful during the season and even in the Grey Cup. Their first season, they're important in the Grey Cup, for goodness sakes. The best Canadian at the Grey Cup this year was a rookie. He
He
was a
was.
rookie. Does that tell you anything? And I say that again now. I'm being more insistent about this because of what you just said. You're 100% right. Now, why isn't the CFL realizing, or anybody realizing, that the draft is that important? You could end up drafting a player that could play the best game on that given day, the day that probably, I think, every player from the moment they sign a contract at the Canadian Football League, who doesn't think after signing a contract, I can't wait to make it to the Grey Cup? Who doesn't think when they take a coaching job, like a former Argo coach that went to Saskatchewan? Do you think he's only thinking about being a coach in Saskatchewan, or is he thinking about being the coach in Saskatchewan that takes his team to the Grey Cup? So when you have the best player, the best Canadian on the field on that given day, and he's a Canadian rookie, and you don't think it's important, and you should be doing a lot to talk about these players, build them up, because they're going to fill that. They're going to fill whatever shoe you create to build them, or what envelope you create for them to be important. Somebody's going to fill it. And
Yeah.
you should be there at the beginning. And I agree with you 100%. It's time the Canadian Football League realized how important these and the reporters and the media around it, that how important the draft is and how impactful it is. And tomorrow I'm gonna make sure that I make that point tomorrow when I ask my questions of the Canadian Football League. I think that's something to really consider. You're 100% right that it should be more of a show, and they should frame it in the way that, hey, the guy that gets drafted this year could be the guy that's the most, the most valuable Canadian in on the Grey Cup game.
Exactly, right? And
because it happened.
it happened,
It
right?
happened.
You have to, I think teams are realizing that with the way that rosters are constructed in the CFL, if you make the most out of your Canadian talent, so your chances of winning that Grey Cup from that time that Frank has in his hand, the nice little tumbler, right? It just means it's going to mean so much more for
They'll
for
meet the
the
hype. They'll meet the hype. A player will meet the hype. There's hype ready to be, backed up. Canadian players are impactful. It's not, the people who say, oh, well, Canadians, they're not good enough. Well, excuse me.
Yeah, no, I think we're also seeing a boom of Canadian talent just south of the border too. Problem
Absolutely.
is we don't get to hear about them enough because they don't get the opportunity to go to the NFL. Some go maybe to the XFL, USFL, but now you need to see progress, right? To them also coming north of the border, more of them getting the spotlight. So I think
100%.
I think this is something that I think shouldn't go. Again, it's an event that the scouting combine gets overlooked in my opinion more than I think it should, and I think the big change here that we're seeing is this year the CFL is going to stream some of the combine. They
All
didn't do
right.
that last year. They were roasted for not doing it last year. Now they're going to actually do it because there are fans in this league that want to see this. You have to give you. They can't know the content's there. They can't know what's going on if you don't give them a chance to consume that content.
Well, let me continue on the theme. It seems that I've gone on, and I'm very proud of the Canadian players and how they play in the Canadian Football League. And the interest could be there because now, if you're a CFL fan, just a CFL fan, let's just talk CFL fan, because everything grows from that, and then whatever team you, blah blah blah, and all that stuff. But if you're a CFL fan, which I am, and I know that there's a possibility that the player that's drafted could be the MVP in the future Grey Cup. Wouldn't it be nice as a fan and as somebody that considers, because we want to take part, we want to immerse ourselves, we want to be part of the league and understand it. And gambling forces us to understand the game a little bit better. And in this case, what's the over under on again it happening where a rookie becomes a player that becomes the MVP of Canadians, and can we see them when we see the combine? It happened before, and now we get a chance to see the predictability of it, and to see at its root. If you're a CFL fan, doesn't matter which team you are, you go, well, last year CFL Canadian rookie won the MVP, best Canadian. I wonder if there's a player out there. Let's check it out. If you really love the game, you play along, right? Because that's what fans like to do. And I think that's the reason why you're raising the point that you have to turn it into an event, because the fans will, given that they're shown a way to appreciate what they're seeing. In other words, if you do a good enough job to show off the league, show off the draft, there will be fans out there who appreciate it, but the word has to go out there. And that's what you and I do. And that's what every podcaster does. That's what every reporter should be doing for the Canadian Football League. And here's the thing. I'm going to wrap it up with this. My last point on this. It has to happen because the media, the print media is disappearing on the landscape of the Canadian Football League. We're not seeing as many media types following every team. Every team is suffering not enough coverage. So the Canadian Football League has to go to them. That's my final point.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. If you want people to take the draft seriously, you need to make it a serious event, right? And it won't happen unless you got partners. As you said, they can't just say, "All right, yeah, we'll do it." People have to show up for it. Okay, they can show up for it, but you have to you have to make it worth their while in a way, right? Media, they're looking for content,
I
especially in the local markets. I feel like this is something that on a national scale, that's where the challenge becomes. How do you get the national media to care? They'll care in Hamilton, they'll care in Winnipeg, Regina, even Edmonton to a degree, Montreal. How do you get it nationally? Those who aren't in those local markets to really gravitate towards the event of the CFL draft. That to me, I think, is the biggest question mark there.
You're 100% right. And you know what? It'll be a lot of fun to talk about the draft, how the teams will do, what they'll do to make it happen. It'll be a ton of fun. And of course, this is an opportunity, as I said at the top of the show, to talk about things other than the draft. And there's a lot of questions out there. You know, we get a chance to talk to all the GMs and coaches. Some of the things that you know some of the things that we'll get to talk about are going to be a lot of fun and very interesting. I mean, as two guys that cover the Argos, you know, we pretty much cover them as much as anyone. Um, there's a lot of stuff to talk about with the Argos about what's going on here. We've heard some reports. It has really, you could say the Argos have been Kellyfied. Um, what Kellyfied means hasn't been established, but the horizon is wide and the altitude is high on where it can go.
Yeah, we haven't really spoken really much about this whole situation. We've talked about obviously the fallout from the year, but um, we haven't spoken about the recent developments.
We've talked about rumors
Yeah.
that we hear, conclusions that we draw based on those rumors, and you haven't heard it on this show because we do not deal with speculation. We deal with as close to reality as we can fact check. And the fact is, Kelly has a legal issue that has drawn the Argos into it.
Mhm.
And that legal issue is now going through our legal system. And now you've got a situation where there's a distraction. Tomorrow's going to be a basically it's going to highlight how distracting the situation is, because once the GM and the coach start talking, the questions about Kelly are going to come up. I hope it doesn't cloud the issue of why we're really doing this. Not that it's not important. It's news. It's newsworthy. Don't get me wrong. But we also want to talk about football and how the team's going to look like. We don't know yet officially who's their defensive coordinator, right?
No, right. There's more. What I'll say is there's more to the Argos than just what's going on with Chad Kelly, but the quarterback's always, especially the quarterback that they invested a lot of money in, is going to get a lot of attention. I like that's it's not right.
Face of the franchise.
Yeah.
And
Right.
right now people are afraid that the face of the franchise has a black eye.
No,
That's
exactly,
clear.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's that, but you know, the Argos with the way that I don't think I've ever seen a team um you know go through what the Argos have gone through. They had one of the better regular seasons in the CFL history, but because you know what happened with the way the season ended, how they flamed down the playoffs, and then with what's happened since, everyone's like, "Oh, is this now the beginning of the end for the Argos?" There's one thing here that the Argos have been able to do is they've and look, the big thing here with the Argos is, you know, as much as they've lost players, they kept quite a big part of their leadership core.
A
right?
successful team bringing back all their players that that contributed to that success. And when you win a Grey Cup, or when you have a very special year where your team establishes records, team records, don't be surprised that a lot of players that you have on your team will be valued assets for other teams to purge.
Yeah, no, right? It's bound to happen in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely.
And I guess also I mean, we talked about the big question right now for the Argos is who's going to be the defensive coordinator. Guy I thought could potentially be in the running
He's gone
is
now.
is going to the Elks in Jason Shivers. I thought he would have been a logical fit for them, but apparently going to work for Chris Jones was more appetizing for him.
And while that's an issue we can talk about, ownership change there. How does that ownership change, or that question about how they're going to deal with the system with the framework of ownership? Really, it's not an ownership change; it's a framework of how the ownership that exists now, how it's going to work. It's a community-based team, which the community owns the team, so it's not a question of they're selling the team. They're basically telling their community that owns the team, okay, we've had some pretty bad years here. Here's what we're going to do to improve the situation. We had the president, the head of our organization, quit. We thought he was our guy. He's not. Now here's Plan B. So it's that. Sorry that we've taken this away from. We're talking about the Argos, a specific issue, but these are parallel problems, right? This is the boardroom problems, and in the case of the Argos, it's the legal problems. And again, these are things that are going to distract us from hearing about the football team. Sure, we'll talk about Edmonton for a second here. They brought in ex-Argo, good segue, McLeod Bethel Thompson, their leadership team, management team, their assistant general manager said Trey Ford is not ready to be the face of the organization. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, folks? He's not their number one quarterback. So they felt he couldn't be, so they brought in an experienced guy that has proven that he can bring his team to the Grey Cup and proven that he can start a Grey Cup game that they win.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of pressure on Chris Jones right now. Many thought he was going to get let go this year. To me, this is a veteran coach, not ready to put his job on the line for a rookie quarterback. He'd rather let a veteran that's my thinking, right? You trust the veteran more. You trust someone that's had more experience, who's got maybe a little more to his resume. Now, has Trey Ford shown that he can, do good things in the CFL? Absolutely. I thought he did enough to earn the chance to compete for a starting job, right? And now they're basically saying, sorry, kid, we're going to go with the rookie. Sorry, we're going to go with the veteran. We're not going to go with no longer a rookie anymore. In my eyes, he's not a rookie anymore. So what I think, if you're Trey,
the situation, David, that's the pressure of the situation they're under.
Here's the thing with Trey Ford. You know what? He can probably not be happy about the situation, but you know what? If you sit tight, if by some reason you get into a game, what you do is you show what you can do. And at the end of the season, I don't know what his contract situation is like. If he's under contract, something, another team will give you a shot if they think you're ready. There are going to be opportunities for Trey Ford in the CFL. I almost guarantee it. There's a lot of teams that are in need of a better quarterback, and they'll look at the opportunity to bring in a Trey Ford if they think he's the real deal.
David, history again. I'm going to quick history lesson. The last time McLeod Bethel Thompson started a season, he was the quarterback of the Toronto Argonauts, and he was the face of the Argonauts, just as he's going to be starting the season, the face of the Edmonton Elks. He brought his team to the Grey Cup, as I said. Mind you, though, he didn't finish the Grey Cup game. Kelly did. And Kelly
Yeah.
became the number one quarterback the next year. Kelly was given an opportunity because of a terrible situation from McLeod Bethel Thompson, who deserved a better fate. He got injured during the game. His throwing hand that brought Kelly into the into the game, and he carried the team the rest of the way to win the Grey Cup. If I'm Trey Ford, I'm thinking, history is kind of interesting. This is the Canadian Football League. One quarterback isn't guaranteed of being the quarterback all year. Nothing other than that single point has been driven into our heads home for the last few years, where there isn't one quarterback that'll play all year. It's possible. I'm not saying it isn't possible, but it seems improbable today. And being a backup quarterback today in the Canadian Football League, Kelly is he's the highest paid quarterback in the Canadian Football League. That's his first contract as a starter.
Yeah. Right. This season
So Trey Ford's got something to look forward to.
Yeah. No, like for me, it's like when you look at the way that Trey Ford's whole situation has kind of worked out for him, or hasn't worked out for him. I think you have to also consider a lot of other factors. Unfortunately, teams are going to they're set in their ways in a lot of ways, right? And I think for him, I still think he's going about it the right way. He's not pouting. He's not sitting there pouting. We haven't heard anything really about that. Hopefully we don't. But I do think that we can maybe hopefully see maybe this is also the Elks doing what's right for him as well. He may not realize it. We may not realize it, but in some cases, you rather not throw him at the wolves if they feel like that's not the right move for him. But in my opinion, you won't know until you try it. Other teams are willing to go with younger guys. It's just the way that the market's changed now in that regard. Younger. Eventually, you got to bring in the new crop. And we're going to see a little bit of that. Drew Brown going to get his chance. Right? The cap. The cap.
The cap.
Exactly. And not as many established quarterbacks out there to have as well.
The cap is the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Every situation that's discussed, every time you get into a conversation in any room, whether it's the GM's office or the coach's office or the defensive coordinator's office, doesn't matter which office you go in, which circle you find yourself in, the cap is always a factor. And one of the biggest ways to make the cap less of an issue is to bring in younger players, as you said, because you're 100% right. You got to go with younger players, because I don't like using the word cheap, but they're cheaper. They're more cap friendly. There you go. They're more cap friendly. The younger players.
Of course they are. Right? Like there's no secret. It's no secret that younger players are getting more of an opportunity because they're also cheaper talent.
So we're talking about the draft again. See how we end up back at the draft. See, the draft is very important, and how your team drafts is very significant. And this is it. So we've talked about the importance of elevating the talent on the team with a good Canadian pick. We now also are talking about, with a good Canadian pick, you can help with the cap. So the draft and Canadian players help in a lot of ways, right? Because we've seen a lot of good Canadian receivers. One just went to Edmonton from Toronto that you and I both liked. Am I surprised that he's gone? No, I think what's happened is he was too expensive, so he went to Edmonton. That's, again, Canadian players and the cap. They stir the drink when it comes to the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the name of the game, right? I think the CFL would benefit with going younger in a lot of ways, right? It just means so much more. And, I guess, yeah, you want teams to be good. You want teams to be successful. You also want to see the best football played, right? Younger players, tend to show up. I wouldn't say show up more, but, inject some new blood. Yeah, that's probably the best way to say it.
Absolutely. It's an important thing that should happen. I'm totally enthralled with what's going to happen with the draft. And we've talked about it from the team's perspective. And I said, we talked about how important it is because you can have talented players that can play in the Grey Cup and become very impactful. We've talked about how young players help with the cap. Let's talk about it from the player's perspective. Now, imagine if you're a young player and you're hoping to get drafted in the Canadian Football League, and you remember and you see a player that you played for or against or with or whatever, and he becomes the Canadian MVP in his rookie year. How does that affect you as a draftee? I think that raises a little bit of the excitement level and the performance need. It's not a small thing to get drafted in the Canadian Football League right now, because you can instantly in 1 year turn into a star given the opportunity and having the talent.
Yeah, I would say so, right?
It's rare, but it's possible.
Very rare. That's the thing.
But what I'm talking about is how all the players who are going to be drafted, how they can believe actually in the Canadian Football League, there's an excellent opportunity to be very successful very quickly.
Of course. Well, that's the thing, right? You're not. Well, it depends on the position, right? How you come up on the depth chart. What are teams willing to offer in terms of opportunity? There's a little bit of that involved too. Teams aren't drafting a guy and saying, "Yep, he's going to be our week 1 starter at this position." You have to still work and fight for it, right? In a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And what we talked about earlier is that, there used to be offensive linemen, but, offensive linemen, they needed time to develop.
Yep.
But, when you talk about talented players like receivers or defensive backs, I'll throw defensive backs in there, and quarterbacks too. Quarterbacks, not so much because, I don't want to talk about the bias or prejudice against Canadian quarterbacks, but it does exist where, American coaches understand American football and understand it better than Canadian football, which makes it, there's an extra layer of what a Canadian quarterback has to do to be accepted, which is why when BC elevated their number 1 Canadian quarterback, who's now in New England, that was kind of an anomaly almost, right? Look at Trey Ford's experience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he also went through the Canadian system, right? That doesn't usually happen. The thing too with Trade Ford is I know there are a lot of teams that were very interested in him as a 2nd or 3rd round pick, right? And the Elks decided we're gonna jump up a little bit here and take him because the talent was there, right? And having the Canadian, I don't even think it really has much to do with the Canadian quarterback. It's just the talent that he has.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think that's really the bigger
potential.
One too. Exactly.
And the thing about potential is that it requires time. Just by virtue of the word potential implies in the future, right? But there are players that their talent can overcome time, right? They can become an immediate success, which was the point I was making earlier, and which is why it's harder for guys like Trey Ford, because they're not going to get the same kind of opportunity because they're so central to what the game is about. If you get a receiver, like we've had great receivers, great defensive backs, they have a function. They fit within this little envelope, and the challenge of being a really great receiver in the Canadian Football League, it's challenging. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like being a quarterback, right? Yeah. And it's not like being an offensive lineman, in the sense that to capture the ability and the understanding of the game is a little harder. So, this is probably why a lot of teams are going for players outside of the offensive line, because what's happening is you get 3 years to keep him, and then by the time he learns to be a good offensive lineman, he's a free agent.
True.
Whereas a receiver, what we're learning in those talented positions, those 3 years don't require, a lot of teaching, because the ability is the overriding factor that makes them a star.
No, I think you're definitely right on that. How many teams have lost? That's why keeping them and identifying if that's a player you want to keep, that's why they get paid the big money, even before to keep them around. I think about the Argos. How many of the guys they've brought in they made sure to sign? Peter Nicasio is probably the biggest example. They made sure to pay him, even though he was dealing with some injury issues. they knew getting an offensive lineman, putting in the time and effort they have to develop them, the investment they're investing in them.
Absolutely. So a team when they draft, they have to in the Canadian Football League, they have to think about the long-term goals, but now there's an immediate goal that's become present and a possibility. So that's what's going to make the draft interesting, and that's something that, if they can, if however how the CFL frames this, what they're going to do, I think they should make sure to key on some of those facts and some of those things, because that's important to people like me who love the game and want to understand, you know, um, what it takes to build a championship team. It's what all us fans want for teams that we follow or leagues that we follow, like in our case. But teams we follow because you know uh, I have a obviously concentrate on what the Argos are doing. A cursory impact with Hamilton because I go infrequently, but I go to Hamilton games as well. And then Ottawa's too far, Montreal's too far. So for me to go to games and to talk to players, to talk to coaches, it's going to happen in Toronto and in Hamilton, which does mean that I have more of a interest or an understanding, really, I think is the fair term, an understanding of what's going on in Argoville and in Tycat land.
No, exactly right. And so
So
it'll be very intriguing to see how it kind of all plays out and shakes out.
now, Simone Lawrence retired, right?
He did. He's retired and he's sticking around the organization
Yeah,
because
and he should. He's a fan favorite.
Mhm.
But it was time for him. I agree with him. I felt that that it was time for him to retire, not because of anything other than he needs to be. It's like there are certain personalities, right? And I'm going to frame this through personality. He's a big personality, and for that big personality, he has to have a big impact on the game. He wasn't having as
Mhm.
big an impact on the game the last year or two.
Yeah.
Same way, when we talk hockey, right? Teams draft players, and they say if this guy isn't a top six forward, he's not a bottom six forward. You feel what I'm saying? So unfortunately there's a box that players have to fit in, right? And
Mhm.
Simone Lawrence has to be an impactful player because he's a leader. And let's be honest here, leading in a locker room is great. That's awesome that players can lead in the locker room, but it's the players who lead on the field that make the biggest difference in an organization.
Mhm.
And he knows what that's like, so he'll be an asset to the organization because he understands that principle probably more than most people in football.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? And it's I think also just an effort on the organization to keep that relationship open, right? He might not have won a Grey Cup as a player, but you keep him around the organization, and if you're able to win that Grey Cup, he's still around the team. Sure, it might feel different to not win it as a player or to win it in like a different role, but he's still around and he can enjoy it if they eventually do get to where they want to get to.
Absolutely. So I'm looking here at the Canadian Football League, and Marshall Ferguson is he is the guy when it comes to the draft.
Mm.
And he says there's 6 players that could create some buzz. And I really think he's right that 6 players is pretty good. If that's how many, I'm looking to see here. Um, he's got Calgary offensive lineman John Boss, and that's Calgary. Then
Mm-hmm.
York defensive lineman Jason Jean-Pierre Messier. Then he's got Alberta DB Tyshawn Blackburn, Laval receiver Kevin Mittal, McMaster defensive lineman Owen Hubert, and Laurier defensive lineman Luc Brubachet, or Brubachet, depends how he says it. I apologize if I'm not saying it right. So those there, and they speak to what you talked about, David, very accurately. Not one of them is an offensive lineman. No, one of them is John Boss.
Yeah. I mean, and a Calgary, one out of Calgary. Calgary's done a great job at developing offensive linemen. So, you know, I wouldn't think twice about taking him. Right, I think that's a really quality ad there. If for any team that gets him, but I do think that yeah, Canadian universities, the talent is getting better for sure. Right.
The American teams. There are a lot of in U.S. college. There are a lot of Canadian players who are very impactful in U.S. college.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And we're looking. I'm not sure if what else can we talk about in the Canadian Football League? Okay, we talked about the new ownership. We've talked in the recent past. So just real quick, Ottawa has something to prove, right? They're the team that everybody constantly says they're on the cusp. They look like they might be a team.
That's the team where, yeah, the fan base has been very patient the last few years. At some point, they'll figure it out.
They got
the thing.
the sooner the better, right? And then we got Montreal, who won the Grey Cup. You had a quarterback that decided to take a team friendly contract in the hopes of maintaining a really good team. So they've got some stuff to prove. They're going through a little bit, but not much of that. We won the Grey Cup. Now there's some of our guys are a little harder to keep. The retention issue is hitting them just a tiny bit. Not much, but I think they can. They've done really well, actually, as far as I'm concerned, in retention.
Of course,
they've done really well.
Core players, though. Look, they did lose. They did lose a very, I would say, important part in Austin Mack. Right.
Right.
He left to go to the NFL. But here's the thing: next man up. They're always about that. Always about that. I think it's also just buying into the team's mentality as well.
Yeah, we talk about Hamilton, and we talk about the change there. We talk about the new head coach. We talk about the fact that they've made a lot of I think subtle changes. Part of Simone's departure, and they brought in some guys that they think can be team leaders, and that's really important. We see that every year. We saw it in Montreal. They brought in a couple of guys. Two guys made a big difference in that team. They went from being a team challenging maybe for first to actually winning the Grey Cup.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's always tough, especially as defending champions, because now again, remember the whole talk about no one expected us to be there. No one expected us
there anymore.
How many? I should have looked. Maybe just give me 1 second to look, because the CFL does their the way too early rankings. Way too early rankings. Which team do you think they had at number 1?
Argos.
Nope.
Montreal
1.
Good.
Winnipeg 2. BC 3.
Uh-oh.
Who do you think is 4?
Bet you it's not Toronto.
Nope.
Who's 4? Let me see. Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan's 4. Where do you think the Argos are on this list?
Okay, we're at 5, right? We're at 5, right?
We're at 5.
I'm going to say 7.
No, they're not a 7.
6?
Nope. They're at 5.
Worse. Oh, they're at 5. Okay.
They're at middle of the pack. A team that went 16-2 is now middle of the pack because of one loss that apparently changed the whole dynamic of that team.
I think there's more. I think that has what's gotten into the reporters' heads, and I think it's just because that's who we're talking about here, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about CFL reporters coming up with
this was the CFL.ca staff.
Absolutely. The CFL reporters, the league's reporters.
Yeah.
Don't think, David. It's the Kelly thing. It's the Kelly thing. That's the albatross around.
And apparently losing AJ Ouellette was a big one too.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, look, the defense is going to be a little different too, with a different coordinator in there as well.
Well, and every expert, which CFL reporters are, know that and this is a terrible thing for Frank to say, and I'd be afraid to go in the locker room after saying this. Well, I'd be afraid of going to half the locker room. The defense carried this team.
Yeah.
Most times.
In a lot of ways, in certain games where the offense wasn't able to was struggling, it was the defense that stepped up to keep them in the game. Now I know we only have a few minutes left here. Which team do you think they put as the 9th ranked team going into this year on the power rankings?
Okay, got Ottawa. Ottawa's a candidate. It could be dangerous here. Calgary, Ottawa, Calgary. I'm gonna go Calgary.
You know Calgary? You're right. It is Calgary. Calgary is at 9.
Ottawa at 8.
Okay, now we have the top 5 established with Toronto, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, BC, and Montreal. Who do you think they had at 6?
Well, process of elimination. So, like I said, Calgary and Ottawa at the bottom. Winnipeg, they're in. BC's in. Edmonton.
You have Edmonton at 6?
No. I'm going to say. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'll say Edmonton at 6. Ottawa at 7. No, is that what it is? No. Ottawa at 7. Oh, Calgary at the bottom. And who did I say? Ottawa and Calgary at the bottom. That's 7. No, that's 8 and 9. I'm missing a team. Sorry. Ottawa.
The Hammer.
Yeah, Hamilton. So Hamilton, I'm going to say, is at 6. Let me put them at 6.
You're going to put them at 6? So you're going 6 Ottawa, 7 Edmonton, 8 Ottawa, and 9 Calgary?
Something like that, yeah.
You're just off.
Oh, okay. So Hamilton's
Edmonton at 6.
They got Edmonton higher?
Yeah.
Yeah, with McLeod Bethel Thompson as the quarterback, yeah, that would make sense.
And hopefully with some improvements to the offense as well. They're hoping for a better outcome.
So they're saying they're going to be 6th?
Yep.
So they're saying they're going to make the playoffs.
Essentially, yeah.
7, 8, 9 aren't making the playoffs.
Yeah. So 2 of them are in the East.
Yeah. So it's going to be a crossover.
1 is Ottawa at 7.
Yeah. So, and then that means a crossover. So that means, let's see, we said Edmonton, and Ottawa we said was 8, and Calgary was 9. Who did we say was 7?
You had Edmonton at 7 because you had Ottawa.
But they're not. So
Hamilton is at 8.
Hamilton's at 8. So Hamilton, they're saying Hamilton and Ottawa don't make the playoffs.
Nope.
So they're saying that you've got Edmonton. Oh, yes. Edmonton, Saskatchewan, BC, and Winnipeg make the playoffs by what they're saying right there.
Yeah. This is from February 21st. So first few weeks of free agency, this is where they believe teams are going into the season based on the early rankings.
Here's the good news if you're a fan. The good news and the bad news. The CFL.ca guys and gals can be right, but they also might be wrong. So if you're a fan of a team that they're saying won't make the playoffs, don't bet on it. Because we saw a team in the Montreal Alouettes that were self-proclaimed underdogs who weren't even going to make any noise, and they ended up winning the Grey Cup. And I go back to the draft again. If you draft well in the Canadian draft and get a good young player, they can make a difference. But at the end of the day, what has to happen is you have to have good Canadian talent that isn't necessarily coming from the draft, but it's coming either back home because they want to play close to home, or you convince a player that's a Quebecer to play in the West because the team that you're bringing them to has a good chance of making it to the Grey Cup. And that goes for every other province as well. I was just trying to make the point that Quebec players have gone outside of Quebec and been very successful. And, because they're one of the hotbeds of football in Canada.
That's true. It's true. We'll see how it all plays out.
It'll be fun. We never got a chance to talk about the quarterback in New England real quick. Give her a.
Nathan Rourke is getting another shot. He's getting a shot.
They cleared the deck a little bit, didn't they?
They did. They could still draft a quarterback, though.
Oh, absolutely they can.
But we'll see how I think they will draft a quarterback. But look, you're
I like where
you're
he's
another
sitting.
injury away from being that much closer
I
to
like where
playing.
he's sitting. They can afford to try a couple of quarterbacks during the season, and it'll start with the preseason. We'll see what happens if he has. Put it this way: if he has the kind of preseason he had last year, right, with New England this year, that'll have a different impact on the decision-making process, I think.
It could, yeah.
It could make a difference. David, thanks for doing this, buddy, as usual.
Thank you, Frank.
Now, for those of you that are Leaf fans, we're going to do a Leaf broadcast after this with David. So look for that as well. And
Locked on Leafs.
I locked on Leafs. That's right. I subscribe. Yeah, and you can subscribe too. And you can subscribe to Candid Frank Stanisci on YouTube, 10:30. That is Candid Frank Stanisci, 10:30. All right, everybody. Thanks, David, for doing this, and thank you all for being here. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for joining us. And of course, CFL Talk is here every Monday at 9 p.m. And tomorrow we'll have a chance to meet with some of the coaches and general managers. And of course, this show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. CFL Talk, news, entertainment, and other such programming are available. You can check out all the programs that we have ready for you on SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.